The Knowledge is a podcast of the Levitt Group, the sector interest group for senior marketers within the Chartered Institute of Marketing. To find out more about us, visit our website at www.levittgroup.org.uk or read the show notes for this podcast. Welcome to episode 15 of The Knowledge. I'm your host, Peter Domican. This podcast is about attention, and if you're like me, you're probably struggling to focus on one thing at a time these days. Technology is creating endless opportunities to improve productivity, but we're spending so much time responding to these interruptions that we've lost the ability to focus. In this podcast, I'm going to talk to Curt Steinhorst, the author of Can I Have Your Attention? Inspiring Better Work Habits, Focusing Your Team, and Getting Stuff Done in the Constantly Connected Workplace. Curt, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Peter, how are you?
I'm good. I wonder if you could start by introducing yourself and telling us what you do.
I study attention and distraction and am a part of a team that asks the question, what are the trends in technology doing to shape how and what and when and how much attention we have? So when we think about attention, it's a limited resource, and the decisions we make as to what we ignore and what we put our attention on ultimately shape what we buy and what we spend our time on, what we get better at, what we actually forget even exists. And these decisions are radically changing in today's distinct technological market.
So a lot of us seem to be struggling for attention and focus these days. Why is that?
It's an interesting and complex challenge, and I think there's some really basic things that we all relate to, and then there's some deeper questions that I think we have to ask. And at the simplest level, we live in a moment in history where we've never had so much within our immediate reach, and at the same time, we've never been so immediately reachable. And the way the human brain is wired is to attend to things that come in front of our faces. So what comes in front of us, so the pings and the dings are perfectly designed to grab our attention. And for most of history, our brain made decisions about attention in ways that made sense for the time period, but it wasn't a time period marked by infinite and limitless exploration and access.
So all this technology was supposed to make us more productive. Why then is it causing such a big problem?
Yeah, and I should just the caveat I would give here is I'm pro-technology, and in some ways I would argue that some of our biggest challenges is not the technology, it's that we have technology that we need better technology, and the newer technology actually can help solve some of the challenges that older technology has created. But there's a lot of noise out there about how major tech companies, often based in the West Coast of the United States, based in Silicon Valley, are intentionally gaming us to where they're grabbing and stealing our attention. And that's a true thing, but I would go further and just say that when we actually understand the very foundations of how our attention works, technology grants us what none of us were supposed to be able to resist. It gives us the stuff we want, and that's awesome, but no one was supposed to have to choose between working on a spreadsheet and watching a funny cat video on YouTube. This is an entirely unreasonable competition because everyone chooses a funny cat video on YouTube. But then the question becomes, how do we go about in a world that offers both of those things, structuring work, thinking about how we market to better align the way our brain works with what we want to accomplish?
So how does our brain work when it comes to focus and attention?
There's three big areas that we cover, and the most basic is, I would call it the curious nature of attention. Our brain is made to be in search of new, interesting things. This is one of the most interesting and frustrating challenges that I have in a lot of the conversations I am in with company leadership. For a lot of people, the model of focus is a machine. If we could just be more disciplined, more focused, block out the noise, don't look at that interesting new thing. But fundamentally, we survive because our brain finds new things, interesting things. It explores our world, and our brain says once we've assessed it, we either master it by zooming in and focusing on it more, or we realize it doesn't matter and it disappears in the background. So the challenge here is that we've gone from a world of incremental exploration where the space that we occupied limited what we put our attention on, and the people that we surrounded ourselves with in that physical space helped direct what we should ignore and pay attention to a world of limitless exploration, infinite exploration. And that's the big challenge. It's not that we somehow are worse at focusing. We're not disciplined. We need to be more, we need to have better self-discipline. The challenge is we need to figure out how do we invigorate and capitalize on our curiosity in a way that still gets us productive.
Is this a generational thing? Is there a difference between, say, baby boomers and millennials? How does it actually work?
Yeah, great question. So for 7 years, I've been a part of the largest generational research firm in North America. And it's interesting because often what people think is this is a generational challenge. And there is a generational layer to this challenge, no doubt about it, in terms of preferences on what channels and what platforms that people are going to use, youngest to oldest. But what's actually interesting here is that the primary and fundamental change and challenge here is not, in fact, generational. People of all ages are connecting. In fact, it's not even millennials that are spending the most time connected to digital. It's actually Gen X. And then when you look at, if you add TV watching, TV viewing to the overall screen time, boomers are beating everybody. We're all struggling. Now, one of the big challenges with the younger generation is we've actually had this interesting myth come up where we've been taught, and even older generations believe this, that that younger people are uniquely able and capable of multitasking. That they can manage more inputs because they're used to managing more inputs. And unfortunately, that's just factually wrong. When we try to manage multiple inputs, depending on what those inputs are, if it involves language in particular, then what we're actually doing is we're flipping back and forth, and we're costing ourselves in a lot of dangerous ways. Time, money, quality. These are things that we lose when we try to multitask.
Can you quantify the effect that this inability to focus is having on us?
Yeah, and I should say there's a layer down here because, can you walk and chew gum at the same time? Yes, probably. That's not what we're talking about. It's basically it's the challenge becomes when we're trying to juggle spheres of life, spheres of activity that have nothing to do with one another. So when I'm trying to answer a text from my spouse while responding on social media to a customer while answering in a meeting someone else's question, that's where we have a problem. And when we try to juggle multiple spheres, there's several quantifiable things. First one, on average, it's a 40% drop in efficiency. We're slower. Secondly, the quality of the work of whatever our primary assignment goes way down. In fact, Harvard MBAs, when adding basic arithmetic to an essay, the quality of the essay went down to about a second grade level. And here's the more dangerous part, where those are just the surface level, because some work we do, we don't actually need to have high quality. We just need to be responsive, right? The more things we try to simultaneously manage, our ability to differentiate importance is eliminated. So everything feels important. And at its core, attention is given. It's a matter of selection to what matters. We can't figure out what matters. And then the last one is we lose the emotional connection to what we're doing. So we might get it done, but we wonder why 2 years later, our teams, when we've created a culture that prioritizes responsiveness, our teams are all emotionally disengaged, think they need to find a new job, think they're not happy, when in fact it's just the number of things that they're managing. They've lost the ability to assess how what they're doing actually drives something that matters to them and to the people that they're doing it on behalf of.
And in some of those jobs, that switching has become part of the process. So if you're a marketing manager and you've got responsibility for social media, you're constantly flitting around between one thing and another.
Yeah, and I think when we work with marketing organizations or teams that are like companies in their marketing department, it's interesting because they uniquely have a twofold challenge that most others don't have. And the first challenge is, how do you reach a customer who's has more inputs coming at them than ever? So that's a basic challenge of marketing today, built on a premise that is faulty in an attention economy. And then even more, the very platforms that they need to use, absolutely must use, are extremely powerful, cannot be ignored, are the same platforms that can create the very sources that are the very sources of distraction for everyone. And when I say distraction, I don't mean that you're on your phone. Sometimes that's the best thing we can be doing. What I mean is confusion about what matters. If attention is what matters, distraction is confusion about it. So we go to the places that now scream everything matters out of context, and we're supposed to proactively manage Twitter or Facebook or Snapchat or whatever, and it's those places that are helping to make it confusing for them.
And part of the problem, I'd suggest, is that we just don't have the etiquettes around these new forms of technology because they're coming around and changing so quickly.
Yeah, we haven't established cultural norms for what's appropriate. Now, I should say there's a reason that this happens. If we go back to thinking about attention as what matters, the reason that people respond as quickly as possible, reason people get offended when we don't respond, one of the biggest reasons we're brought into organizations is because they've created a culture where email and Slack or whatever form text messaging responsiveness has just become so viral, for lack of a better word, that no one's getting any work done. They're just having to respond all day. But if you think about it, if attention is what matters, when we give our attention to someone, when we don't respond to someone, we're saying they don't matter. And so what happens is, until literally 10 years ago, if the only people I could respond to were the people that were around me or that called me. And so we were limited in who we could be offended by not giving their attention to us. But now everyone expects that we should be able to be available, and we're offended. And so it hurts. And it's actually there's nothing worse than feeling like someone isn't giving you their attention when you're asking for it, because it says you don't matter. So it makes sense, but we do have to create some better ways of thinking about it in order to not give everyone a small piece and no one our actual attention.
Okay, I think we're going to come on to things that can help improve our focus and attention later on in the podcast. But for the moment, I'd just like to ask you, what are the other forms of distraction that we see in the office environment?
Yeah, and that's a great question, because technology is merely a piece of the puzzle. What we find that are driving these issues, number one, we just mentioned it, cultural expectations. So organizations that are built on older ideas that say, if you're a part of the team and you're committed, that means that you collaborate, you engage, you reply, and so that actually exacerbates the issue. So that's some more cultural norms. Other cultural norms that we see happening are in space, physical space, like in the office. That's why only 7% of people say they do their best work in the office. And it's because the cultural norm is that they should be able to walk in, an open door policy, right? That in fact, that you're rude when you walk by someone, you don't say hi. Well, we have these, like over 70% of businesses have adopted an open office floor plan, which is great for collaboration, I suppose, although there's some evidence that says it isn't. It's great for cost, but it's not great for focused effort. And so, but to be a part of the team, you got to talk to them. So culture is a big part of it. And the other pieces involve demographic shifts. So if you think about someone who's under the age of 30 as they enter into the workforce, their identity is already formed and being formed digitally. Historically, you came in and you were a part of a company or a team and you said, okay, I'm part of this. Like, this is part of who I am. Well, now their identity is separated. And it's actually, why would they not escape anytime they're bored? Why would they not escape anytime they don't want to have an uncomfortable conversation, anytime they're confused? Because who they are is mostly based on what's happening across the social channels that they constantly live on.
So not just the company you work for, but the digital tribes to which you belong. That's quite interesting. I wonder if we could come back to this concept of office space and whether there's actually been any work or study on how best to design offices.
Great question. The good news is we have the chance to work with some really great interior design and architecture organizations that are aiming to do this differently. Unfortunately, most organizations are aware of the challenges, but it has not entered the level of it hasn't shaped decision making around space yet. There are some companies. I'll give a good example. Deloitte and Touche. Deloitte is a organization I've had the chance to work with, and they've worked very hard, especially at some of their training facilities, to create an environment that allows for the type of work being done to align with the level of barriers to other people for that moment. So how do we create different types of spaces that allow for collaboration when it matters, for what we would call a vault, where you're not accessible where it matters. And so the big shifts that we're seeing in those that are doing it right are away from one desk to do everything in a cube or open office to a hybrid model that allows for movement and variety based on the type of work at the time that you need it.
And that obviously presents a leadership challenge in terms of how to manage people, how they operate, giving them the space to do their work.
That's right. That's right. The challenge of leadership today is it's never been more difficult for a leader to motivate, engage their people. And the problem is they've never had access to more information that should help them make those decisions. But what we see happening is with more information accessible, what we tend to do is we operate in a constant paralysis that says, I know there's more information that if I had it, I would make a better decision. I need more data. I need another meeting and we can collaborate, because meetings are easy to schedule when you can see everyone's calendar. And so leaders actually avoid decision making because they are fearing they're missing something. The fear of missing out isn't that you're afraid someone's on a vacation in the Greek Isles. It's that you are afraid you might not have the information to make the right decision, which is interesting because it actually therefore pushes back what we see towards wisdom and experience having real significant value in the onslaught of information overload.
Let's move on to how we get focus. First of all, when do we need it and when do we not?
Great question. Great question, because it's not a one-size-fits-all. The model shouldn't be perfect, efficient focus all day long. We were not wired to do that. There's a couple places that we always work to prioritize, and it should be noted that we live in a complex world with distinct and complex roles that have different demands. There's on our team, there are those that are involved in strategy and content, ideation, and the demands on their focus and attention are radically different than those whose responsibilities are to facilitate our focus. So they eliminate from us the stuff that keeps us from being focused. So with that in mind, the keys are, if it involves deep thinking, strategy, creative and effective communication, we have to create space so that the rest of the world isn't accessible to us so that we can actually do focused work. And so basically, that's part one. So the hard work, the mentally strenuous work, we have to eliminate access to the rest of the world. We have to create higher barriers so people can't get in, we can't get out. And then the other one that's probably even more foundational and more missed is to prioritize, to actually discern what matters. We have to have space at the very front end to say, my day, my team, my week, my work its success and mission will be defined by this. So we do a daily vault session where we pause and we say, what matters today? How do I define success today? We also do a monthly one where we say, where are we headed? And because if we think about attention, if attention is given to what matters, and distractions, confusion about what matters, then if everyone else is screaming, this is what matters, pay attention to this, pay attention to this, if we don't actually know what matters, then we're going to be reactive all day long. So for us, put it simple, we need to focus when we got to do hard work, and we need to focus when we need to figure out what work actually should be done. And that for us comes typically at the beginning of the day.
And that fits in with the concept of agile planning that we've discussed on a previous podcast. I wonder if we could come back to focus and how we sustain that, because obviously you said earlier on it's a finite resource, and it's something that we probably can't keep up for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week.
That's right. And making that the goal ensures everybody feels depressed. And what do we do when we feel bad? We go to something that makes us feel better, which is a funny cat video on YouTube. Like it's a terrible cycle. Different people have different capacities to focus, and that's just something we have to be okay with. And so for someone like me, which ironically I have ADD, this started the study that went through academia and then into the corporate world, and consulting actually started because I couldn't focus. I couldn't focus. So for someone like me, what I've learned is I need a big hump. I need a big barrier to get focused work done. Like I will try to avoid, when I wrote the book that I wrote, like I'll avoid writing a chapter to do anything, even stuff I don't like to do, just to do it. So during that moment, I create a really high barrier. I turn off access to the internet. I use an app called Freedom that makes me not have availability. It's awesome. I can't recommend it enough. And then I usually set a timer for about 40 minutes. Those are my typical sessions, 40, 45 minutes. But here's what's important. What we find is that when people actually get over the barrier and zoom in and are working on something that is challenging, that requires all of them, we can actually extend it far longer than we think we can. And so rather than setting a simple rule that says 25 minutes on, 10 minutes off, what I encourage is create a high enough barrier, dive in as long as you can. But then once you start to get tired, like force it for at least 40 minutes or at least 25 minutes, try to increase that. Then once you get tired, get up, walk away. In fact, there's a lot of evidence if you can walk around in a park or look at nature for 15 minutes, you can jump back in with the ability to do it again. So rather than just keep going, what we'll end up doing is we'll end up exhausting ourselves and avoiding work. So when you start to feel like you can't get work done when you're trying to avoid it, rather than sitting at your computer and like reviewing 7 emails or looking at a to-do list, totally get up, eject from the situation, take a 5 to 15 minute break, and then come back in. We do 2 to 3 vault, or I do 2 to 3 vault sessions a day. I aim for 2 to 3 hours of deep thought work, and then the rest of my day is responsive to emails, setting meetings in the afternoon when I can't focus individually, and I recognize my limitations.
And how do you go about coordinating all that? I mean, obviously, it's very easy to go away off on your own and do a piece of work, but you need to collaborate with other people and ask questions at certain points. And obviously, if they're all off and locked away, then it starts to cause practical difficulties. Could you tell us something about that?
One of the critical aspects today is how do we create the actual context? Because people over and over again, we listen to podcasts and we think, I got to be more self-disciplined. I got to focus better. Productivity is not personal. Focus is not an individual endeavor. You can be the most focused person in the world, but if you are on a team of people that are interrupting you and a culture that's demanding interruption or prioritizing or rewarding it, you have no shot. So what we do here, step one is we got to schedule a meeting. This is the fastest way to increase focus in your team. Schedule a meeting and ask 2 questions. Number 1, what are the expectations of response time? Related to that, when can I be unavailable? Totally unavailable. Now you have taken people that are enemies of your attention to be allies. And then the second one, what channel is reserved for emergencies only? What do I use if I actually have an emergency? Because otherwise what happens is I send a message on email, they don't immediately reply. I send a message on the messaging software. I send a text message. I call their cell phone. I call their office phone. I knock on their door. I go to the stall. Like I have 7 messages for one thing that's not urgent. If I have one channel that's reserved, which for us is phone calls, just for emergencies, then now I don't have to feel like I need to be constantly tethered to my inbox for fear that something that is actually urgent I'm missing that. Yes, so schedule the meeting, and then the other one is set physical barriers. Put a sign out, close the door. turn off the internet with something like Freedom and dive in.
So how does that work with remote working? I know companies like Buffer have no offices and everybody works remotely all over. A lot of startups do because obviously it's a cost issue.
Great question. There's a brand new organization I just did, a company that does, it's called Focus Buddy, where you can actually have a video screen of someone else doing focused work, because when we see other people working, we work better. And so that's one thing that we see. The big thing with remote versus in person is remote actually reduces the physical interruptions, like the random person walking by as they're getting coffee. So that's a good thing. It has two risks. Number one risk is it's in an environment or a space. People are working in a space where they need to get other stuff done, like laundry. So how do we help them as individuals say, let's find a distinct spot where you're just getting your work done? And then number two, it actually increases the tendency of leaders to expect immediate responsiveness, because they can't see if you're working. Therefore, if you don't respond, you might not be. And so what has to happen is, one, trust. We need to trust. Like as leaders, we need to say this is what we're expecting, and we need to measure not based on their responsiveness. Number two, we need to make sure the tools that we're using allow for the easy, not an out-of-office email, which is still really powerful, but we aren't going to set those for 30 minutes. Typically, it's a little bit too hard. But like if you're using software that allows for instant communication, that they can set their settings to vault mode or focus mode, so they can let people know. But then the biggest piece is we got to get back and have that meeting where we actually say we're all remote. When do we not need to be available, so that people can actually know, like, hey, they told us they weren't going to be available every Monday from 9 to 11 a.m. And the reason they told us that is because that's when they're getting the stuff done that we're actually paying them to do.
I think there's some great practical tips in there. I want to move on to marketing itself. Obviously, if there's this huge problem with attention and focus, that creates a problem for marketers in getting through that.
Yeah. So this is honestly the very heart of what I enjoy thinking about, we enjoy working on the most, because it is a distinct challenge that when you understand what's at stake and how people are fundamentally wired for their attention, you can have some real strategic advantages. Let me give you just, I can give you a few high level, and you can say, let's dive a little further. So first observation is the decreasing value of interruption. The exchange, that the entire advertising world as we knew it was built on, you don't need to pay us, but what you do need to pay us in is your attention, meaning I can watch a free TV show, but it's going to cost me in my attention. Well, that exchange is not working anymore, right? Because now we have access to everything. And the other angle here is that interruption outside of any context is offensive, increasingly offensive, and can have a counter effect. And it also, the more divided our attention, the shorter our attention spans, the less likely we will even remember it. So what that means is that as marketing people, we have to think differently about how we want to connect people to the products and the services, and let them know marketing has never been more important, but there's some things we need to do differently. So a couple things we can think about in this category. The first one would be a rethinking of brand and marketing as how do we make sure that the internal narrative that is shaping work internally is powerful enough to be compelling for the team to want to share it outward and for the team to be engaged in what they're doing. So marketing actually has a role in helping shape a narrative that keeps people focused at work and helps them share it beyond that. So that's one level. I'll pause and see if I feel like I might have just gone a little bit too far.
Actually, I just wanted to go back to something you said a little bit earlier in that, when you said that interruption is offensive. I wonder if you could say more about that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we like to be interrupted when it is interesting to us, when it is new, when it is timely about something that is that we're already wanting to get more information on. On the other hand, the idea, if you think about attention as the most limited resource people have, and the fact that they now have the entire world at their fingertips, if I'm watching one YouTube video and someone says, here, before you do that, I'm demanding that you pay attention to this for 10 or 15 or 6 or 3 seconds, that has no context or interest for that person, it used to be understood and expected, but now it's actually offensive. Like, people literally say, my attention is too valuable, how dare you, right? And further, it actually creates stress. So the more things we try to manage, the more things coming at us, the more confusion, the more we have the brain literally gets stressed and doesn't move forward. And so it doesn't actually give us what we want.
So in terms of getting those marketing messages across, what are the best media for doing that now? You're obviously saying that traditional advertising has its limits.
Yeah. So there's several things. The number one strategy that we would always think about when it comes to employing messaging and narrative that actually creates emotional connection and engagement is if we think about how we make decisions on what's worth our attention. Historically, the number one driver of that has always been our community. Like, for most of history, we lived in a single community, and the community said, this is what matters. Like, pay attention to this, ignore that. You don't need to think about that. In fact, even when we're born, the way that infants learn language and learn how to make sense of the world is called joint attention. They put their eyes on what their parents pay attention to. And so we're heavy proponents for asking the question, how do marketers make sure that they are aligning where and when and the language they're using to be at the places that deeply rooted communities are naturally engaging. So, the role of an influencer in today's social media climate is that they've created a tribe that says this stuff matters. You're like me. We're the same. And so how do we make sure that my product is a product that someone who already fits the profile would market? How do I make sure that I'm sharing the information in a way, marketing in a way that is internal community messaging rather than people from the outside? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. People are more influenced by the people around them rather than being told this is great from somebody that they don't really know or trust. We're coming towards the end of our time together. I wonder if you could point us to some resources. Obviously, there's the book, but other resources that would help people in understanding this area.
Great question, Peter. I'm available across all the social channels, so LinkedIn is probably the best one. But honestly, the best way to engage us and our information is an email address. And my email address is cs@focuswise.com. And if I can reply by providing a short summary video as well as a list of tech that we recommend for this. And then I do a short video, or excuse me, a short 3-minute audio clip about once a week that talks through for executives and leadership specifically how we think about these issues. And that's the best way to stay engaged and ask questions and for us to provide resources.
Curt, that's been really interesting. Thanks ever so much for coming on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure, Peter. I'm excited to have spent the time with you.
So I was talking to Curt Steinhorst, the author of Can I Have Your Attention? Inspiring Better Work Habits, Focusing Your Team, and Getting Stuff Done in the Constantly Connected Workplace. The book's published by Wiley, and it's available from the CIM Bookshop. The full details are in the show notes, including how to get an additional discount until the 30th of September. That's it for this episode. I hope you've enjoyed it. Until next time, goodbye.